Dr. Sarah Chen stared through the containment field at her life's work, a sealed terrarium that represented humanity's first gift to the galactic assembly. The crystalline dome pulsed with a soft blue light, protecting its contents from the sterile environment of the Harmony Station. Inside, a complex network of roots, shoots, and microorganisms worked in perfect synchronization, just as they had done in her laboratory on Earth for the past decade. The assembly's requirement had been simple. Each newly discovered spacefaring species must present a single biological specimen from their homeworld. One species, one offering. It was meant to be a gesture of trust, a sharing of genetic heritage. But humanity, as usual, had other ideas. Final containment check complete, Dr. Chen announced her AI assistant, GAIA. All systems are stable, though I must note again that the Assembly's guidelines specifically request a single species. Yes, Sarah interrupted, adjusting her lab coat's collar. I'm well aware of the regulations, GAIA. But they never specified what constitutes a single species, did they? The AI's holographic avatar flickered with what Sarah swore was disapproval. After 3 years of working together, GAIA had developed an almost human-like expressiveness. The precedent set by other species suggests. Precedent isn't law, Sarah countered, running her hand along the terrarium's outer shell. What we're bringing isn't just a plant or a bacterial culture. It's a statement about who we are as a species. Inside the terrarium, a complex dance was taking place. Mycorrhizal fungi stretched their invisible networks through the soil, connecting the roots of different plants in an intricate web of chemical communication. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria clustered around root nodules, while decomposers broke down organic matter into nutrients. Above ground, carefully selected plants worked in harmony, each species chosen not for spectacular displays or remarkable properties, but for how well they complemented each other. The station's massive docking bay doors parted with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the assembled diplomatic corps. Representatives from 100 worlds stood in ordered rows, each holding or accompanied by their world's contribution to the Assembly's biological archive. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The Vixrathi delegation cradled a floating sphere of liquid metal that somehow contained a living organism. The Zinthar had brought a crystalline tree that sang in frequencies beyond human hearing. Each offering was more spectacular than the last, natural wonders that demonstrated the unique evolutionary paths of their respective worlds. And then there was Earth's contribution, a small terrarium that looked almost mundane in comparison. Sarah could already see the dismissive glances, the whispered conversations behind elegant environmental suits and breathing apparatus. Ambassador Torres stepped up beside her, his dark eyes scanning the crowd. Having second thoughts, Doctor. Sarah squared her shoulders. Not at all, Ambassador. Though I suspect we're about to cause quite a stir. That's what we do best, isn't it? Torres smiled, though there was tension around his eyes. The Assembly has existed for 10,000 years, Doctor. In all that time, they've never encountered a species quite like us. You mean they've never met anyone so stubborn? Sarah asked, managing a small smile of her own. I mean they've never met anyone who looked at their carefully ordered universe and said, we can make this work better together. Torres gestured to the terrarium. That's what your work represents. Not just a scientific achievement, but a fundamental truth about humanity. A melodic chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the start of the presentation ceremony. Sarah took her place in line, the terrarium hovering beside her on its anti-gravity platform. As she waited, she observed the other offerings more closely. The Vixrathi's liquid metal sphere contained a single-celled organism that could reshape matter at the molecular level. The Zinthar's crystal tree was actually a complex silicon-based life form that processed solar radiation into pure energy. Each species had chosen something that represented their highest achievement in biological engineering or their world's most unique evolution. When it was Earth's turn, Sarah stepped forward. The Assembly's primary speaker, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate environmental suit, leaned forward with interest. Humanity presents its contribution to the Assembly's biological archive, Sarah announced, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We offer not a single organism, but a demonstration of what makes our species unique, our understanding that strength lies not in isolation, but in cooperation. A murmur ran through the gathered delegates as Sarah activated the terrarium's display features. Holographic projections sprang to life, showing the intricate relationships between each component of the miniature ecosystem. On Earth, no species exists in isolation. Each is part of a vast network of relationships, dependencies, and mutual benefits. What we've created here is not merely a collection of organisms, but a working model of life itself, a system where each participant strengthens the whole. The primary speaker's energy form flickered, a sign of intense interest or agitation. Sarah wasn't sure which. This is unprecedented. The directive clearly stated. One species, yes, Sarah completed the thought. And what you see before you is a single system, functioning as a unified whole. Just as your own body contains billions of microorganisms essential to your survival, our contribution demonstrates that true strength comes from diversity working in harmony. The chamber erupted in discussion, some delegates expressing outrage at the breach of protocol, others leaning forward with obvious fascination. Sarah stood her ground, knowing that this moment would either mark humanity's greatest diplomatic triumph or its most spectacular failure. In the end, it was the Zenthar representative who spoke first, its crystalline form resonating with harmonic overtones of curiosity. The humans present an interesting interpretation. Perhaps we have become too rigid in our thinking, too focused on isolation, when nature itself teaches us the value of connection. The primary speaker's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. Your contribution will require special consideration, Dr. Chen, but it will be accepted into the archive with the notation that humanity, true to its nature, has once again found a way to challenge our preconceptions. As Sarah stepped back from the presentation platform, she caught Ambassador Torres hiding a smile. They had done it, taken the Assembly's rigid rules, and transformed them into an opportunity to demonstrate humanity's most fundamental belief, that we are stronger together than apart. The terrarium continued its quiet work, each organism playing its part in a dance as old as life itself, unaware that it had just helped reshape humanity's place among the stars. 2 weeks after the presentation ceremony, Dr. Sarah Chen found herself in the Assembly's primary observation chamber, surrounded by a delegation of increasingly agitated alien scientists. The massive viewing window offered a perfect view of what had become the station's most controversial installation, Earth's terrarium, now occupying a prominent position in the biological archive. This is completely unacceptable, declared Chief Researcher Valara, her bioluminescent patterns flashing in agitation. The Murith scientist's tentacles waved in complex patterns that Sarah's translator interpreted as extreme distress. The human specimen is affecting the other contributions. Sarah studied the holographic data floating before them. She couldn't deny the evidence. Subtle changes were occurring in the archive's carefully maintained environment. The air composition was shifting. Microorganisms were appearing in previously sterile sections, and most notably, several of the other biological specimens were showing unexpected growth patterns, affecting or improving. Sarah asked quietly, highlighting a particular data stream. The atmospheric processing load has decreased by 30% since our installation, while oxygen quality has improved by 15%. The Zenthar scientist, whose crystalline form sparkled with varying intensities as they spoke, moved closer to the display. The human speaks truth. Our own specimen's energy conversion rate has increased by 12% since being placed near their system. That's exactly the problem. Valera's translator struggled to keep up with her rapid color changes. These specimens are meant to be studied in isolation. How can we maintain proper scientific protocols when the human contribution keeps encouraging cooperation? Sarah suggested, unable to keep a slight smile from her face. She gestured to the archive chamber below. The Earth terrarium sat at its center, looking deceptively simple compared to the exotic specimens surrounding it. But anyone watching closely could see the changes taking place. The Vixrathi's liquid metal sphere had developed a thin film of beneficial bacteria on its surface, improving its containment efficiency. The Zinthar's crystal tree had extended hair-thin filaments toward the terrarium, its song taking on new harmonics as it absorbed trace elements from the enriched air. Even the highly aggressive Cthid vine, which normally required constant energy input to prevent it from consuming itself, had settled into a stable growth pattern. Your species is disrupting 10,000 years of established protocols, a new voice announced. Administrator Xan, the Assembly's head of scientific research, glided into the chamber. Their energy form was contained within an environmental suit that made them look like a walking constellation. Though I must admit, the results are intriguing. Sarah turned to face the administrator, choosing her words carefully. With respect, perhaps it's time for protocols to evolve. Every specimen in this archive represents a singular achievement, the pinnacle of what each species could develop in isolation. But nature doesn't work in isolation. Life finds ways to connect, to cooperate, to create systems greater than the sum of their parts. And you believe humanity's understanding of these principles is superior to the combined wisdom of the Assembly. Valera's colors shifted to what Sarah had learned to recognize as skepticism. Not superior, Sarah corrected. Different. We're younger than most species here. We had to learn to work with nature's systems because we couldn't control them. Every attempt to dominate or isolate led to failure. Our strength comes from understanding connection. Administrator Xan moved to the window, their energy form pulsing thoughtfully. Tell me, Dr. Chen, was this the plan from the beginning? To introduce a catalyst for change into our carefully maintained order? Sarah joined them at the window, watching as a maintenance bot carefully monitored the interactions between specimens. Honestly, we just did what we always do, looked at the rules, found a creative solution, and hoped for the best. The changes happening now, that's not our doing. That's life doing what life does, finding ways to thrive through cooperation. The chamber fell silent as they watched a remarkable sight unfold below. A spore from the Earth terrarium had drifted through the carefully maintained air filters and found purchase near the base of the crystal tree. Instead of removing it, the tree's crystalline structure had shifted to accommodate the tiny growth, creating a perfect microenvironment for it to develop. Fascinating, the Zinfar scientist hummed. The tree is not merely tolerating the intrusion, it's actively supporting it. The energy patterns suggest a symbiotic relationship is forming. Impossible, Valera whispered, but her colors had shifted to a pattern Sarah recognized as wonder. The specimens were chosen specifically for their ability to maintain independence. Yet here they are, choosing to connect. Sarah observed. Perhaps they're teaching us something important about the nature of life itself. Administrator Xan's energy form brightened suddenly. Dr. Chen, your expertise may be required. The Assembly Scientific Council is convening an emergency session to discuss these developments. It seems humanity has, once again, created a situation that defies our existing frameworks. As Sarah prepared to follow the administrator, she caught her reflection in the observation window. Behind her, the Earth terrarium continued its quiet work, spreading its influence not through force or dominance, but through the simple, powerful act of offering opportunity for connection. Just as humanity had done throughout its history, finding strength not in isolation, but in the courage to reach out and the wisdom to work together. The seeds of change had been planted. Now it was time to see what would grow. 1 month into what station residents had begun calling the Garden Crisis, Dr. Sarah Chen found herself facing the Assembly's Grand Scientific Council. The circular chamber, designed to accommodate representatives from every member species, hummed with tension. Hundreds of beings, from energy forms to crystalline entities to gaseous intelligences, focused their attention on the holographic display floating in the chamber center. As you can see, Senior Counselor Zix announced, their plasma form crackling with concern, The human specimen's influence has spread beyond the biological archive. Environmental changes have been detected in multiple station sectors. The display showed a three-dimensional map of Harmony Station, with spreading patterns of green indicating areas affected by Earth's biological influence. What had started as a small point in the archive had grown into a web-like network spanning several decks. The environmental systems in affected areas are showing increased efficiency, noted Technical Director Wren, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns of cautious optimism. Power consumption for air purification has decreased by 40% in these sectors. That's not the point, thundered Counselor Valora, her bioluminescence flashing in angry pulses. We're losing control of our carefully maintained environments. The human contribution is contaminating. Enriching, Sarah interrupted firmly. The correct term is enriching. Every measurement shows improvement in air quality, energy efficiency, and biological stability. These aren't signs of contamination. They're evidence of a system healing itself. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices and electromagnetic pulses as council members debated. Sarah stood her ground, though she could feel sweat beading on her forehead under the harsh lights. She hadn't expected things to progress this quickly, but life, as she well knew, had its own timeline. Ambassador Torres, standing beside her, leaned in close. "They're scared," he whispered, "not of the changes themselves, but of what they represent. 10,000 years of controlling every variable, and suddenly they're facing something they can't contain." Before Sarah could respond, a new alert flashed across the holographic display. In the archive chamber, the Cthid vine, previously noted for its aggressive growth patterns, had begun producing an unknown compound. The chamber fell silent as preliminary analysis appeared in floating text. "This is unprecedented," breathed Technical Director Wren, their crystalline surface rippling with excitement. "The vine has modified its own biochemistry in response to environmental cues from the Earth specimen. It's producing compounds that enhance the growth of neighboring specimens while regulating its own expansion. It's learning," Sarah explained, stepping forward to manipulate the display. "Or rather, it's remembering. Every species, no matter how isolated we try to make it, evolved in an interconnected system. What you're seeing isn't contamination or chaos. It's life rediscovering its natural state." The display shifted to show another development. The Zinthar crystal tree, now sporting a healthy colony of Earth-originated moss at its base, had begun producing new types of crystalline structures. These formations appeared to amplify the beneficial properties of the moss while providing it with optimal growing conditions. "The specimens are cooperating." Counselor Valora's colors shifted to patterns of confusion and wonder. "But they're from entirely different worlds, different evolutionary paths. Life finds a way," Sarah said softly, "not just to survive, but to thrive. And it does that best through cooperation, not isolation." A sudden commotion at the chamber's entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of junior researchers burst in, their various forms expressing urgent excitement in a dozen different ways. The leader, a young Murith scientist, rushed forward with new data. "Honored Council," they pulsed, "we've detected something remarkable in Section 7, near the civilian habitation zones. The environmental changes, they're not just affecting the station's systems, they're affecting us." The display updated to show medical data from various species. Subtle but significant changes appeared across multiple physiological markers: improved respiratory efficiency, enhanced metabolic function, better stress response patterns. "This is exactly what we feared," Zix crackled. "The human specimen is altering the very fabric of our station's ecosystem." "No," Sarah countered, her voice firm. "It's not altering anything. It's reminding all of us, your specimens, your systems, even your own bodies, of something we've forgotten. Life isn't meant to exist in perfectly controlled isolation. We're all part of a larger system, whether we acknowledge it or not." Ambassador Torres stepped forward. "The Assembly invited humanity to share our biological heritage. This is it. Not just our specimens or our science, but our fundamental understanding that strength comes from connection, not separation. The chamber fell silent as new data continued to stream in. In the archive below, the specimens had begun creating what the sensors could only describe as a neural network of chemical and electromagnetic signals. They were communicating, sharing resources, adapting together in ways that defied 10,000 years of careful isolation protocols. Perhaps, Technical Director Wren ventured, their crystalline form shimmering with intellectual excitement. We should consider this an opportunity rather than a crisis. The humans have given us more than a specimen. They've given us a new perspective on life itself. Sarah watched the debate unfold among the council members, their various forms expressing a complex mix of fear, fascination, and growing understanding. The seeds of change they'd planted were growing faster and stronger than anyone had anticipated. But then, that was the nature of life. Given the right conditions, it would always reach out, connect, and find new ways to thrive. As she studied the latest data streams, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Humanity's gift to the assembly hadn't just been the contents of their terrarium. It had been the reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let go of control and trust in the fundamental patterns of life itself. The emergency alarms caught everyone off guard. Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing adaptation data in her lab when the station's lighting shifted to deep red, and a harmonic tone that transcended species barriers echoed through every deck. Alert! Critical failure detected in primary radiation shielding. Backup systems engaging. All personnel report to designated safety zones. Sarah's hands flew across her holographic interface, pulling up station diagnostics. A massive solar flare had overwhelmed Harmony Station's outer defenses, and the radiation was playing havoc with their carefully calibrated systems. Worse, the backup shields were struggling to compensate. Dr. Chen. Ambassador Torres burst into her lab, his usually impeccable uniform askew. The council is convening an emergency session. They need you there now. The council chamber was chaos when they arrived. Species that normally maintained strict diplomatic distances were clustered together, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of light, sound, and electromagnetic signals. The backup shields are failing faster than we can reroute power. Technical Director Wren reported, their crystalline form clouded with stress patterns. The radiation is causing cascade failures in our environmental systems. The archive specimens are showing signs of severe stress, added Valora, her colors muted with concern. Most of them are already beginning to deteriorate. Most of them. Sarah asked sharply, moving to examine the data herself. Her eyes widened as she saw the readings. The Earth terrarium. It's not just surviving, it's responding to the crisis. The holographic display showed something remarkable. While other specimens withered under the radiation stress, the integrated ecosystem they'd created was adapting. The microscopic fungi were rapidly evolving radiation-resistant properties. The plants were accelerating their photosynthesis, processing the contaminated air at extraordinary rates. Even the soil bacteria were transforming harmful compounds into benign ones. More than that, Sarah breathed, expanding the display. Look at the spread pattern of these adaptations. The beneficial changes aren't staying contained to our specimen. They're being shared through the networks that have developed between specimens. Impossible, Counselor Zixt crackled. The radiation levels should be destroying any such connections. Unless, Ambassador Torres interjected, those very connections are what's allowing them to survive. No single organism could adapt fast enough to these conditions, but a network of diverse species working together. The station's environmental readings in sectors influenced by the Earth specimen are stabilizing, announced a junior technician, their gas form swirling with excitement. The adapted microorganisms are actually using the radiation as an energy source, converting it into less harmful forms. Sarah's mind raced. The very thing some of you feared. The spread of Earth's biological influence through the station might be what saves us. These systems haven't just been changing our environment. They've been preparing it for exactly this kind of crisis. What are you suggesting? Valera pulsed. Remove the containment protocols, Sarah said firmly. All of them. Let the adaptive network spread through the entire station. The specimens have already proven they can work together in ways we never imagined. Give them the chance to save us all. The chamber erupted in debate. 10,000 years of careful control versus an unprecedented leap into the unknown. But as radiation levels continued to rise and more systems failed, the choice became clear. Do it, ordered the High Counselor, their energy form pulsing with determination. Disengage all biological containment protocols. What followed was unlike anything the Assembly had witnessed in its long history. As containment fields dropped, the adaptive properties developed in Earth's specimen and shared through its networks began to spread rapidly through the station. The Xanthar crystal tree's newly developed structures served as conduits, amplifying and distributing beneficial changes. The Thid vines modified biochemistry helped other specimens process the radiation, while the Vixrathi's liquid metal organism adapted to form protective barriers around sensitive equipment. Radiation levels dropping in all sectors, reported Technical Director Wren. Environmental systems are reorganizing themselves. The network is creating its own protection protocols. Sarah watched in amazement as the station's entire ecosystem transformed before their eyes. What had started as a simple terrarium had evolved into something far more profound. A demonstration of life's incredible ability to adapt and overcome through cooperation. You knew this would happen, Valera said quietly, her colors shifting in complex patterns. Not this specific crisis, but you knew life would find a way to work together if we just gave it the chance. Sarah shook her head. We didn't know. We hoped. That's what humanity does. We hope, we trust, and sometimes we let go of control long enough to let wonderful things happen. As the emergency alarms finally fell silent, the council chamber's view screen showed something remarkable. Throughout the station, in sections that had once been sterile and carefully regulated, new forms of life were emerging. Not chaos, as many had feared, but a beautiful, complex dance of cooperation that had saved them all. The Assembly's great experiment in isolation had ended. In its place, something new was growing, a living demonstration of humanity's most profound understanding. That life works best not in carefully controlled separation, but in the messy, magnificent collaboration that nature itself had spent billions of years perfecting. 6 months after the radiation crisis, Harmony Station had become unrecognizable. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at her favorite observation point, watching the transformed biological archive below. Where once stood isolated specimens in sterile containment fields, now thrived an integrated ecosystem that defied all traditional classification. The Xanthar crystal tree had developed a symbiotic relationship with Earth's plants, its crystalline branches now supporting climbing vines that enhanced its energy absorption capabilities. The Thid vine, once feared for its aggressive growth, had become a crucial part of the station's radiation defense system, its modified biochemistry protecting more vulnerable species. Still hard to believe, isn't it? Ambassador Torres joined her at the window, looking considerably more relaxed than he had 6 months ago. The Assembly's just approved the new Cooperative Biology Initiative. They're implementing similar systems on stations throughout the galaxy. Sarah smiled, watching a maintenance bot adapt its routine to accommodate a new growth pattern. The best part is, each station's ecosystem is developing differently. They're finding their own balance, their own ways of cooperation. Just like on Earth. Same principles, endless variations. Dr. Chen. The voice came from behind them, melodic and multi-toned. Valera approached, her bioluminescent patterns showing what Sarah had learned to recognize as amused resignation. The preliminary results from the outer colonies are in. Those that adopted the Earth model have shown a 70% increase in environmental stability and a 40% reduction in resource consumption. And the traditionalist colonies? Torres asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. They've submitted a formal request to implement the changes, Valera admitted, though they insist on calling it controlled biological integration rather than the Earth method. Sarah laughed. They can call it whatever they like, as long as they understand the fundamental principle: life works better together than apart. The station shuddered slightly as it began its scheduled rotation, bringing the local star into view. The radiation that had once threatened their destruction now powered a complex web of life that protected them all. Through the transparent walls, Sarah could see the latest addition to the station's exterior, a living shield of radiation-resistant organisms working in concert with the traditional energy barriers. "The Assembly has scheduled a special session," Valera announced, her colors shifting to formal patterns. "They're proposing a fundamental restructuring of our biological exchange protocols. No more single specimen contributions. Instead, new species will be asked to demonstrate their understanding of cooperative systems. They're using Earth's approach as the new standard." Torres mused. "That's quite a shift from 6 months ago." "A necessary one," came a new voice. Administrator Xan glided into view, their energy form contained within a much simpler environmental suit than before. Like many energy-based species, they had found they needed less artificial protection within the station's new living ecosystem. "Your species taught us something profound, Doctor. Not just about biology, but about progress itself." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "For 10,000 years, we sought advancement through perfect control, through isolation and careful management of variables. We thought wisdom meant maintaining unchanging systems." Sand's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. "Humanity showed us that real progress comes from embracing connection, from allowing systems to grow and change naturally." "There's poetry in that," Valera added, her patterns rippling with scholarly interest. "The youngest spacefaring species teaching the oldest members of the Assembly a lesson about the fundamental nature of life itself." Below them, in what had once been the strictly controlled archive, a new specimen was being introduced, the first under the Assembly's revised protocols. Sarah watched as the biological offering from a newly discovered species was carefully integrated into the existing ecosystem. Almost immediately, the surrounding organisms began to adjust, making space for the newcomer while offering chemical signals of support and cooperation. "You know what the really interesting part is?" Sarah said, pointing to a data stream that monitored the station's overall biological activity. "The system isn't just maintaining itself anymore, it's innovating. We're seeing entirely new forms of cooperation emerging, combinations that nobody could have predicted." "Much like humanity itself," Torres observed. "We never know quite what we're going to do next, but it usually involves finding new ways to work together." The observation chamber had grown crowded as more officials arrived for the upcoming assembly session. Species that once required strict environmental separation now stood side by side, their various environmental needs met by the station's adaptive ecosystem. The rigid hierarchies and careful distances of the old assembly were giving way to something more organic, more dynamic. "We thought we were just solving a technical problem," Sarah mused, watching the diverse crowd. "How to maintain life support systems more efficiently. But we ended up demonstrating something far more important, that the principles that govern life itself are the same ones that should govern how we interact as species." "Connection over isolation," Valera hummed. "Cooperation over control," Tan added. "Growth over stasis," Torres finished. Sarah smiled as a new alert caught her attention. Somewhere in the station's sprawling ecosystem, another unexpected collaboration was emerging. Another problem was being solved not through careful control, but through the messy, magnificent process of life finding new ways to work together. "You know what the best part is?" she said, turning to face her colleagues. "No, her friends, we're just getting started. Every new species that joins us brings new possibilities, new ways of connecting and cooperating. We're not just maintaining a station anymore, we're growing a future." Outside the window, the galaxy spiraled on, vast and full of possibilities. Humanity had brought more than a garden to the stars. They had brought a new way of thinking about life itself. And like all good ideas, Once planted, it would continue to grow, adapt, and thrive in ways no one could predict. The story of Earth's garden wasn't ending. In many ways, it was just beginning.